Well, thank you. It's such a pleasure to be joined today by an incredible roster of women to talk about this topic. I'm pleased to introduce Mary Daly, President and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, Mayor Lori Lightfoot, Mayor of Chicago, and Ai-jen Poo, Executive Director of the National Domestic Workers Alliance, to really talk about what's possible as we consider this new economy. And ladies, I'm going to begin with one question posed to all three of you. Now that we're seeing what we're grappling with in the wake of COVID 19 and so many issues that are rising to the top, what do you think may be possible coming out of this crisis that wasn't possible before from a US perspective?
Pleasure to be here with all of you. Look, I think one of the big headlines coming out of the pandemic is that the things that we thought were impossible before are actually possible and really absolutely necessary. And let me drill down a little bit more on that. When we think about economic recovery, we have to be thinking about it in the context of a broader ecosystem. And one thing that the pandemic has definitely laid bare is a lot of underlying economic fault lines all around race, around class, gender, and inequalities that people believe were intractable, too big to actually solve. But I think the lesson for me, at least in the city of Chicago, is we ignore those fault lines at our peril. We see that many of our communities are extraordinarily exposed and vulnerable due to historic inequities that just can't be ignored 1 second longer. Whether it's around working class, whether it's workforce development, whether it's wages and salaries and work conditions, and healthcare and access to it, and the list is long. All of these things interconnect and really are going to dictate whether or not we fully recover in all of our neighborhoods with all of our people, and particularly those who have been hardest hit by the pandemic. So I really think this gives us a tremendous opportunity to right some historic wrongs because our future truly depends upon a very expansive and inclusive economic recovery.
Great. And I know President Daly would love to hear your thoughts as well, because I know you've certainly remarked that we're seeing a tale of two pandemics.
We are seeing a tale of two pandemics, and I really like what Mayor Lightfoot just said. I think that one of the things we noticed in this pandemic is it magnified and, of course, amplified so many of the fault lines that she referenced. I think that was exactly right. And what it does is it's so big, we can't look away. It really helped us learn that these are not things we blame people for. These are things for no fault of their own they find themselves in. And my hope is that this tale of two pandemics has opened our eyes, and we will commit to continue to look, and we'll make everything possible, because we won't think of people as, well, they're not good enough, so that's why they find themselves in that situation. And I think what's possible now is that we'll align and we'll recognize that our duty as people is to deliver the next generation a better future than the one we inherited. And we certainly can't give them a worse one. So I really like what Mayor Lightfoot said. I think this interconnectivity, seeing the fault lines, and capitalizing on that vision so that we can make this move forward. I think everything's possible.
Great. And I'd love to hear your perspective as well, as you represent a group of care workers that are deemed essential.
Well, I would just build off of that by saying that I am incredibly hopeful as well, because I do think that the fault lines that Mayor Lightfoot named, the deeply embedded inequities that have shaped our economy and really defined it, were so deeply embedded that we needed a big disruption in order to really shake loose what is possible. And this pandemic has disrupted everything about the way that we live, work, care in this country. And it creates this opening for us to actually address the things that have now been revealed to so many of us. And many of the things that have been revealed are things that workers at the bottom of our economy have seen and always known, right? So we're able, when we used to go to the movies and we used to be able to see 3D movies, we would put on those glasses and all of a sudden things would become in full relief, right? Multidimensional. At the bottom of the economy, what workers were seeing was a complete lack of access to a safety net, working incredibly hard and still not able to make ends meet, even though they knew that their work was essential, right? Now we all see that some of the work that was least visible to us is actually essential. to our safety, our health, and our well-being, and it's often done by women and workers of color. And now that we see this, we can't unsee it, and we have the disruption we needed to chart a new status quo, a new way forward. So I do feel really hopeful that this is our time to reset the economy for the 21st century.
Great. And as you mentioned workers, I know another essential group of workers are teachers, and we've seen so much happening under the pandemic with education. Mayor Lightfoot, I'd love for you to comment on this question. We've seen the role that teachers in schools play, not only in educating children, but in the functioning of local economies and participating in the local workforce. Any lessons about the future of unionized labor, particularly with respect to teachers?
Well, look, I think this pandemic has been especially hard on all workers, unionized or not. There are whole industries that have just shut down as a result of pandemic enforced closures. And workers are human, right? They feel the same things that we all do. And there's a tremendous amount of fear and trepidation and trauma that is at the core of a lot of concerns about workplace safety. And that was certainly a through line in our recent discussions with our teachers union, but it's not unique to teachers. I think it's something that all workers are feeling some concern about, and employers really have to grapple with that, not just municipal employers, but I think all employers. People are still scared. They're still fearful about their health, the health and well-being of people in their household, and whether or not they have the luxury of teleworking or have to come and be on the front lines every single day. Those fears are still very much present. And so I think we have to deal with that reality as employers. And as a mayor, I have to deal with that as a reality for residents in my city, and making sure that workplace conditions, whether it's at City Hall or in some private sector company, meet the needs and the challenges of this moment, making sure that workers understand what their rights are, that their concerns are amply amplified, I will say, and that the employers are being responsive to make sure that they're creating a workplace environment where they can be heard, but also where they can be safe.
Great, thank you. And as we've all talked, I keep hearing today themes that align to our K-shaped recovery that the U.S. is experiencing, where we have a growing divide between the haves and the have-nots. I'll start with President Daley. As you think about this, do you agree that this is what we're seeing? And if this is where we're headed, what policies and practices have the best possibility of reversing this trend from your perspective?
Sure. Well, the pandemic, as we know, really affected some sectors more than other sectors. So as Mayor Lightfoot just referenced, if you have the luxury of teleworking, then you actually are doing pretty well. But that's conditional on what industry you work in. If you're teleworking in the airlines industry, you're not in very good shape. So it really has been a tale of two pandemics, in the sense that those who didn't have the luxury of benefiting from some of the things that happened in the disruptions, they've been left behind. And those who had the luxury have been growing, pretty rapidly. As a consequence, we have deepening divides that were already present, as many have mentioned. That is where we have to make sure that we don't leave anyone behind. It's more than just recognizing that we had this embedded systemic inequality that was here. It's actually gotten much worse. And so an inclusive recovery, one that we can be proud of, would be one where everybody has a place, where we go back and get all of those workers who were displaced, we bring them back into the labor market, and we rethink what back in the labor market looks like. I just heard Mayor Lightfoot talk about workers essentially having to fight for their rights. And what would be better, what policies we really need, is to think that employers, workers, we want a work-life, not a balance, but a work-life integration. So people don't have to make trade-offs between schooling their children, taking care of their families, or working. I mean, I really want a world where we don't have to eat at a local restaurant, get served by individuals, and then wonder if they made a trip to the food bank on the way home, which was already happening prior to the pandemic and is continuing to happen to a very large fraction of our population during the pandemic. So a K-shaped recovery is not acceptable. That's the bottom line. We need a recovery that includes everyone, and in fact has most rapid recovery for those at the very bottom who have been bearing most of the weight of the pandemic.
Great. And on that front, Aijen, I'd love for you to comment on some of the specific policy changes that you've helped pass over these years that speak to these issues, particularly for those workers right at the bottom.
Absolutely. Well, I want to actually lift up an initiative that we've partnered with Mayor Lightfoot on, which is a really powerful model of how we can work together as organizations, advocates, city governments, and in the private sector to lift up workers who are at the bottom of the economy, like domestic workers. The initiative is called My Home is Someone's Workplace, and it really does what Mayor Lightfoot named, which is educate employers about and workers about their rights, and really encouraging people to have the conversation about what it looks like to work safely and do it in a way that recognizes the rights that workers at the bottom of the economy have. We've worked also with the city of Philadelphia. Philadelphia passed a domestic workers bill of rights that mandated a portable paid time off for the city's 16,000 domestic workers, which is really exciting, the first of its kind in the country. We've also worked with the city of Seattle to pass a domestic worker bill of rights that established a standards board that brought together employers, workers, and the city to sit at the table together to talk about what fairness looks like for domestic workers in the city and to move forward on solutions from there. And I really do think that that multi-stakeholder approach, where we're drawing on the assets in the community, the incredible courage and resilience of workers and their perspectives, employers and their perspectives, and the power of city government together to talk about what it looks like to have fairness in the workplace, that kind of model I think is really essential and has made a huge difference in terms of workers understanding they have rights, they have a voice, and that they have value and can have dignity at work, regardless of where they work, what their employment status is, how they work, what the relationship or the designation is, right? Everyone has to be a part of the recovery in this moment, and this is a way to send a message to workers who've been left behind that they are essential.
Great. Thank you. And on that note, what a wonderful and powerful example. Mayor Lightfoot, I'd love for you to comment on just the role that cities can play in creating more inclusive economies and driving forward policies like the ones that you're already at the center of in Chicago.
Fundamentally, for me, the best public policy is one that reflects the realities and the lived experience of people in our cities, particularly people who feel like they're never seen, never heard by the powerful, by government, don't have a seat at the table. When we go out and extend ourselves with a humble heart and a listening ear, and then bring the power of these testimonies and stories into public policy and do things to protect and uplift them, to me, that is the most noble part about public service. And we've been able to do that even in the midst of the pandemic in a lot of different circumstances. And as I've said to my team, we have to build not temporary scaffolding around a problem, but a foundation on which we can build for the future. And we've been doing that in a lot of different ways, particularly around healthcare disparities. But when you deal with healthcare disparities, you're dealing with the economy and the economic realities of people's lives. And that has, I think, an important residual benefit.
Great. And in our last 2 minutes, ladies, we're all doing this panel, and here we sit with a new urban economy where women have been particularly hard hit. What, if you can offer in 30 seconds, a closing thought is needed in order to reimagine the full participation of women as we look towards an economy that hopefully is better in 2021 and beyond?
Well, could I start? Because I want to say something about this particularly. Aijen has talked about essential workers. Mayor Lightfoot's talked about essential workers. We have to think of essential workers as not disposable. We often treat them as essential and we see them as essential, but then we treat them as disposable right around the corner. And I think we have to break that cycle. The second thing we have to realize is parenting is also essential work. And if we put those two concepts together, I feel like we'll welcome women back into the labor force. We'll want them to participate, and we'll want them to also take care of their families and not be in this awkward trade-off that we mentioned earlier between, feeding families and taking care of families. That's really what's going to welcome women back, and it's what's going to get us back to our full potential.
I'll just build off of that and say that I think we should think about caregiving and the work that goes into caring for our families as essential infrastructure that we have to invest in. Childcare, paid leave, an expanded safety net, elder care, like home and community based services in particular for the aging population and people with disabilities. This is essential infrastructure that makes all of it possible. And if we invest in it in the way that we do bridges, tunnels, and broadband, I think that we can actually transform this economy for women.
So I'll pick up on all of these themes and phrase it in the context of a round hole square peg paradigm. By that I mean this: I am a woman that's worked in corporate America for most of my professional career, and what we do is we open up the doors to institutions for women. But what we haven't done is thought about, well, what are those basic premises of these institutions? They are built by and for men. So welcoming women into an institution that is built by and for men ignores the realities of who we are, what role we play in the families. So I think this, when we think about welcoming women back to the workforce, we've got to think about, well, what does that workforce actually fundamentally look like? And are we building structures that reflect the realities of women's role often as not only a breadwinner, but also the primary caretaker of our children? And if we think about it that way, we're going to build better, more responsive institutions that actually do welcome women and provide them with the kind of supports that are necessary to be fully engaged in the range of responsibilities that we always have.
Great. Thank you. This has been a terrific conversation where I know so many bold solutions, partnerships, and ideas have been surfaced. I really appreciate all of your insights. And as we transition to the next part of the program, we all know an essential component of city economies is arts and culture. So let's go to one of our cities, Helsinki, to learn more.